Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
I want to share a story of, well, we all have stories, right? But this is a story that my own personal experience as we were rolling through COVID. It was the spring of 2021, and we had endured pretty much a year of COVID, if I recall. And we were going to go out to dinner. My kids, who are all grown now, they were off doing whatever, but they happened to be home during COVID just for whatever reason. And we were going to go out to dinner. And actually, thinking about it, was the fall of 2020. So it's been about 6 months of enduring this because all my kids were home. And so we were going to go to this little local bar restaurant that's probably about a mile from where we live. Shout out to Flanagan's. Great little place. Great. It's been around forever, out in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing near it. And people show up there. And as you can imagine, it was crowded because things hadn't really been open. We'd done a lot of carry out, but they were just finally kind of lightening things up. And do you walk in with a mask on? Do you wear your mask? What's the protocol? It was very unnerving. But I remember walking in there and kind of scanning and looking for a table. And there was a woman that my wife and I knew. And she saw us and she came over and she just gave us a big hug. And just said, "Hey, how's it going?" And that was pretty much the whole conversation. And she walked away. And I turned to my wife and I'm like, "Oh my God, that really felt good." Obviously, you're hugging amongst your family and that stuff, but just another human being I'd talked to a lot of people. I talked to a lot of people over Zoom, a lot of phone calls. But to actually be in close proximity with somebody and actually, just getting a hug from somebody there was something to that. And I noticed as AmSpirit Business Connection chapters, I'll talk, what these are weekly meetings, mainly meeting in person. And when the lockdown happened, much of it went on Zoom or Teams or whatever people were most comfortable with. And then as people were coming back to in person, what I noticed about groups when these people are coming back to in person is that they were almost giddy. Some were giddy. They were just giddy. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm around people. And I've really kind of thought about that. And there's certainly something to that, us getting together. Now, this all begs the question, what sort of communication is the best communication? In person, over the phone, Zoom/Teams, email, text. I think the answer is it depends. It depends on the communication. There's two battling forces here. There's efficiency and there's effectiveness. I can email 1,000 people and that's very efficient, but as far as building a relationship, it's not very effective. And so you kind of have to weigh those two things, and it depends upon what's happening. And we can get into the pluses and minuses of each, and that's, we could spend a whole podcast talking about that, but you have to look at it and say, okay, do I need to be efficient? Or do I need to be effective in building a relationship? Do I just need to be efficient in communicating? Great. There's constant contact. There's things out there that you can use. You can have a Zoom call with hundreds of people on it, and that's being efficient, but it's not necessarily effective for building relationships. And it's kind of like the amygdala and the neocortex. They both can't be going at the same time. So you're either going to be efficient and talk to a lot of people, or you're going to be effective and you're going to be building relationships. Now we have to remember that humans been around for thousands of years, and I won't get into the historical record of mankind. Certainly not on this podcast. I will certainly talk about it from time to time because it really plays into what happens today and why we are the way we are. But at any rate, we have communicated for thousands of years, and much of it predates anything electronic, even the telegraph. Much of our communication has been going for thousands of years, and it's largely been face to face. In fact, much of our communication was limited to the 150 or so people in the tribe or clan that we were part of. But what they're finding is that the research is finding is that there are electrical rhythms in the brain that oscillate, and I'll quickly touch on those here. Um, and when we're talking to somebody, our rhythms are trying to connect with one another. And so there is, there's something to this communication beyond what I'm saying, what you might see me saying, my hand gestures, my facial gestures, so on and so forth. There's more to it. There's something going on between our brains. And what they did was they connected people in conversation, and it was, very easy to do. You kind of hook their brains up, their not EKG, but their electrical scans of their brain, and they would be having a conversation uh, over Zoom, and then they would be having a conversation face to face. And what they found was there was 9 times as much synchronicity between more synchronicity when they were talking in person versus over Zoom. And when we start talking about Zoom fatigue, we've all heard of Zoom fatigue. Oh, geez, I'm just so sick of being on Zoom, and it's exhausting. And talking in person is exhausting as well, but certainly being on Zoom can be exhausting. I remember during the lockdown, having lots of Zoom calls, mainly because you could, right? You could. I could start the day in Cleveland, 8 in the morning, and have a 2-hour call, and then be on a call in Phoenix, Arizona. At the time was 2 hours behind us, and then get on another call with somebody in Boston, or later in the day with somebody in Portland, Oregon. You could do these things. You could be, and you get to the end of the day, and it's like, oh my gosh, my brain is, my brain's going to fall out of my head. And they termed it Zoom fatigue, and they're finding that there really is something to this Zoom fatigue. And part of it is that when we're communicating with people over Zoom or these electronic means, even when I find there's a difference between talking to somebody on the phone and over Zoom, I much prefer a Zoom call over phone. It's just, I just feel more engaged in the conversation. And I would prefer, to a certain degree, being together with somebody as opposed to over the Zoom call. But when they start talking about Zoom fatigue, this partially explains what's going on. If you think for a minute, think about your cell phone, as a metaphor. If you have your cell phone in Wi-Fi mode and it's searching for Wi-Fi, and there's no Wi-Fi, you're gonna you're gonna churn down your battery if you stop and think about it, because it's constantly looking for, where's the Wi-Fi? Where's the Wi-Fi? You have the setting to look for Wi-Fi, and there's no Wi-Fi, and it's just wasting all sorts of energy trying to find the Wi-Fi, and the Wi-Fi is not there. And so that's, your battery runs down. If that my oldest son Lucas, he's always grabbing my phone and turning Wi-Fi off because I forget to do it. Somehow or another, he noticed. He's an IT guy. He's he's all over that stuff. But relating that back to Zoom, that when we're talking on Zoom, we're face to face with someone, and our brains are looking for something. Our brains are looking for electrical signals that are there. And I actually printed it out. I did some research on this. There are really 5 types of brain waves. There's delta, theta, and alpha. And the delta waves are your deep sleep waves. Your theta waves are deep relaxation or during meditation. So you're not actually asleep. The alpha waves are when you're relaxed, you're awake, but kind of in a relaxed state of mind. When we start talking about the beta and the gamma waves, we start talking of the beta waves relate to focused attention, alertness, and problem solving. And the gamma waves are your cognitive processing, perception, conscientiousness. And so and when we're talking to somebody face to face, there's a synchronicity between those particular waves. And we're on Zoom, we're looking for that. We're looking for that connection. I see the person, I can't find the connection. And this is all obviously happening very, very subconsciously, and it tends to run down our batteries, if you will. And so I'm not suggesting at all. I'm not suggesting at all that you do away with Zoom calls or phone calls or anything like that. Again, there's this there's this battle between or trade-off between effectiveness and efficiency, and you have to weigh those things. Sometimes you don't you don't need to be excuse me. Sometimes you don't need to be efficient, or you don't, or you. Sometimes you want to be effective, and other times you just want to be efficient, and you have to weigh the situations. But you you need to understand that there is something to being together with somebody. And so that certainly manifests itself in how we conduct ourselves. So if you're somebody who's like, you know what, we're just going to have Zoom meetings. All our meetings are going to be Zoom. We could do face to face, but we're going to be doing Zoom. You might want to rethink that, at least in part. Say, okay, rather than doing weekly Zoom meetings, let's do three but once a month, let's get together. Let's be amongst each other. Let's really kind of get in sync, if you will, literally get in sync. Or if you might be interviewing somebody or maybe pitching somebody on a proposal, your best to the extent possible to get in the room with them. They want to do a Zoom, to say, well, I happen to be in Atlanta that day, or that week. Can I just stop by? Now that might be, I don't want to say a bold-faced lie. It might be a little bit of a fib, but you're just trying to get in person with them because knowing now that there's something more to the relationship when you're in person with somebody. And I've noticed that myself. There are a number of people that I have met through the COVID lockdown that I have pretty good relationships with. And it really sort of amped it up once I had an opportunity to meet them in person. One that comes to mind is Matt Ward. He's somebody who became a franchisee. Well, it was just before the lockdown. He and I had done a lot of calls over Zoom. And I remember picking him up at the airport, and it was just like, man, I really like this guy. I liked him before, but now I really like this guy. And it just felt like we knew each other, and we were just kind of really clicking at that point. Tanya Scotisi, who's down in Miami, Berta Medina, who's down in Miami, a couple of people that have done a lot of Zoom conversations with. And when I happened to be down in Miami, Florida, in summer of 2021, made a point of going to lunch with them. And it was just, it just brought, it really kind of deepened the relationship, if you will. So again, I'm not advocating that we totally dump on Zoom meetings or phone calls. I think the efficiency is great. But if you want to get effective in building relationships, you need to get together with people and have a face-to-face, have a cup of coffee, not all the time, but certainly occasionally, to make the best out of, have the best impact out of building those relationships.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.